All right, well, welcome everyone. Tonight we're getting started again with our Ag Technology Platforms Online Software to Manage Risk series, supported by the Northeast Extension Risk Management Education Center and USDA. My name is Jennifer Hashley, and I am the director of the New Entry Sustainable Farming Project. And a little bit about New Entry, I'll tell you in a second, but first, for introductions, if you'd like to rename yourself or add your pronouns so that we know who's here joining us, you can also add to the chat your name, your pronouns, your farm name, where you're located, just so other folks kind of know who's here in the room. That would be really helpful. And we just ask if everybody can keep themselves muted until the Q&A session. Then we'll have an open conversation. People can unmute themselves and ask clarifying questions or other questions to ask the presenters to dive a little deeper into the subject. But you're certainly welcome to add questions to the chat as we go along. Definitely feel free, if there's something that pops up in the moment, please add it to the chat. I'm happy to flag that for the speakers so that if there's something right there in the moment you'd like answered, we can do that. And as you know, I just turned on the recording, so this is being recorded. You're welcome to keep your video on or off while it's being recorded, and this will be posted online afterward in case you want to revisit something. So just a little quick tidbits about New Entry. We're a beginning farmer training program. Our mission is to improve our local and regional food systems by training the next generation of farmers and making sure that food is accessible to everyone. We're located in Beverly, Massachusetts on the North Shore, on the ancestral, traditional, contemporary, and unceded lands of the Pawtucket and Massachusetts people. And some of our programs, we have three major areas. We do farmer training work, we run a food hub, and do some national capacity building programs. We offer a lot of other courses other than this workshop series. We just held an Explore Farming workshop online Monday evening. Our winter business planning course started on Tuesday this week, and we'll be doing some other courses and workshops throughout the year. And we run an incubator farm training program, which provides land access to beginning farmers who come through our program. If folks are in the area, we do an online and hybrid crop production course that will start in May. So pay attention to those sign up dates on our website if you're interested in that. And then, as I mentioned, our business planning course, the winter session just started, but if that's something of interest to you in the future, our next session will begin in October 2022. If you'd like to learn more, we have other videos, a virtual tour. All the recordings of these workshop series will be posted on our YouTube channel. So I encourage you to check that out. As I mentioned, we have a food hub that does various marketing activities with the CSA, food access, and we also do some post-harvest handling, food safety training. So if that's something of interest, keep a lookout for that. And if you are a program-oriented folks running your own farmer training program, we also have 2 national networks, an annual conference, and a lot of resources on our website to help you run your beginning farmer training program. So without further ado, this workshop series is really focused and broken down into 4 major risk management categories. In November and early December, we focused on legal risk, really talking about farmland access, leasing, financial readiness, and things, and looking at all the online tools that help support those endeavors. And right now we're in our financial risk section. So we had a couple of workshops around record keeping tools and software platforms that support that. We had a deep dive into QuickBooks and heard from farmers about how they use that. And tonight's presentation is about point of sale data to help you think about financial management. The next workshops in the series will be a couple workshops in the next couple weeks talking about production risk. Again, looking at some records and data and how do you really track information to make good decisions, keep records for soil and organic, soil health and organic certification. And then in February, we close out the series with marketing risk and really looking at all the different sales platforms that are out there. You know, which one is right for you? We'll hear from a panel of farmers and food hub folks, and then dive deep into all the different platforms that are available with intros by the software companies. You will be able to find all the resources throughout this series, the links, the recommendations, the handouts and other things, and the recordings on this page on our website. And as I mentioned, the YouTube channel. So we'll have some decision guides and tool little fact sheets that will come out of this series as well. So look for those there. This is all free thanks to our funder, the Northeast Extension Risk Management Education Program, which is funded by the National Institute for Food and Ag of USDA. I always like to say there's no such thing as a free lunch. We do have a requirement to evaluate these workshops and make sure that there are actually demonstrated and measurable producer results. So we hope that you will take this knowledge and do something with it. So I'm going to launch a couple of polls here for you to respond to your pre-knowledge questions before the workshop starts. And then in probably end of March, we'll send out a workshop evaluation to see if you have actually taken any action steps in your business to improve your risk management practices. So I'll also send you a quick workshop evaluation link with the resources after tonight's workshop, so you can give feedback to the presenters. So please do help us out by filling those out. So I'm going to go ahead and launch the first poll. It's 2 questions, basically about rating your knowledge of farm financial risk in general. And then the second question is more specific to how would you rate your knowledge about using point of sale data to manage your financial risk? And this is a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being no understanding and 5 being complete understanding. So I'll give you a few minutes to respond to that. If everyone can click those buttons, we would appreciate it, and we'll repeat this at the end. And then without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker for the evening and to thank all of our speakers. So Matt LaRue will be speaking first and giving us a nice overview. He's an extension associate with Cornell University and has 2 decades of experience doing lots of really cool things around marketing and analyzing business decision-making and great things, and has published a lot of great work, and we're excited to have him back as a speaker. And then Becca Rimmel is a fellow farmer, and she will be sharing her experience as a diversified farmer raising lots of different critters on her farm. And she's been the farmer's market manager at the Ithaca Farmers Market and worked with Matt on this POS research project. So she'll have a lot of great information to share. And then we'll hear from Pete Lowy, who's the manager of Codman Community Farms in Lincoln. And they operate a year-round self-serve honor store farm stand, and they use Toast, which is another kind of more geared to the restaurant industry, but uses it in a creative way to manage their inventory, manage their sales and marketing data. So we'll get some good farmer input there. So without further ado, I'm going to end the poll. I hope everybody's had a chance to respond and turn it over to Matt.
Thanks. All right, I'm just going to be able to share my screen here. Oh, let's see. It's funny, we practiced sharing it and then I just screwed it up. So let me share it the right way. All right, that should look the right way now.
Yeah, oh, thanks. That's
great. Well, thanks for having me, Jennifer. I've known Jennifer for many years now. I was just thinking back, I think the first conference that I went to when I started at Cornell, you were at it. So that's going back to like 07. I'm Matt LaRue. I'm an extension associate at Cornell. And prior to that role, I was a cooperative extension agent with Cornell based in a county and did that for about 12 years. Some of the work that I've done in those years, I've always worked with primarily direct marketing, diversified livestock and produce growers. So during the course of that work, came up with something called the market channel assessment tool, which was a means to measure the relative performance of different market channels that farms were using by just collecting data for about 1 week's time. I also came up with the Cornell meat price calculator, which enables people to work out prices for different meat cuts for each channel that they utilize. And then conducted this point of sale research, something that I had really wanted to do for several years, ever since I learned about Square, and finally got the funding to do in 2018. So that's primarily what I'm going to talk about tonight. And I should mention that Becca Rimmel, who's going to speak after me, she was the manager of the Ithaca Farmers Market at that time, also a longtime friend, and now farming and using Square. So I'm really glad that she gets to give her perspective tonight. When I did market channel assessment, we did this on about 30 different farms in New York State, farms that were utilizing a bunch of different channels, again, like farmers markets, CSA, wholesaling to restaurants, wholesaling to grocery stores, even UPIC and roadside stand, a full array of channels. And what we found out of the data from those 30 farms was that farmers markets were consistently a poor performing channel. And what I really mean there is we measured for about 5 different performance factors, but overall what we were seeing is farmers markets tended to be labor intensive, but not really bring in a lot of cash proportionate to the other channels. However, we also recognize that farmers markets are popular. Even as a poor performing channel, they have benefits that we were not measuring with our project. So, for example, farms that are selling through a CSA and farmers market, their new customers, their new CSA customers are going to find them at the farmers market. That's a great benefit with obvious value that we did not measure. And there were some other factors like that, like learning about customer feedback on your product and so on that we weren't measuring. So I guess the idea here was that farmers markets aren't going away, and farmers are going to continue to use them. So what can we do to improve the performance of this channel, recognizing its weaknesses? And so the research question became, can we increase sales at farmers markets using factors that are within the farm's control? And I was thinking there are factors that are outside the farm's control at a farmer's market, such as the hours and day of the week that the market occurs, and certainly the weather. Overall attendance. I think an individual farm may be able to influence attendance, but not really have a huge control over attendance. So those are some of the factors that are outside of control. But how about the factors that are within our control, and what data can we gather? So another way to phrase that research question is to think, is it possible for you to get more money out of this market? And the other thing about the timing of this Square research is that we were seeing that farmers market sales were declining. Remember that 2018 is before COVID, and overall market sales were falling. So when I did market channel assessment research in 2009 and 2010, the average daily sales for participating produce growers had been $708. And by the time we did this research in 2018, that average had fallen to 631, even among some of the same farms in the same market. So, in 2018, I admit I was feeling pretty pessimistic about where this was headed. So that's some of the background that led us to this research. To introduce what Square is, it's not just a credit card machine. I spoke with a colleague yesterday who works in extension and also has a vegetable farm, and I said, I want to see if I can recruit you into my research, my Square research. And her immediate response was, "Oh, we don't have many customers that pay with credit cards." Well, that's not what Square is all about. It's not just a credit card machine. It's really a data collection tool that you can carry with you and use at market. This Square is an app that you can run on a tablet or a phone, and it quickly and easily collects the customer's items that they're buying, the price and quantity for each item, the totals the order for you. So not that the math is laborious at farmers markets, but it does that for you. It even makes change for you, tells you how much to give them back. And then with each transaction, it's also recording the date, the time, and the location. In addition to this, we were adding a few other data fields. We were counting how many items that the farm has available that day. And provided they sell at least one of those, that data is actually inside Square output as well. We're having them take a photo of their market stall each market day, so we could get a sense of how things were arranged, laid out, and displayed. And then we were recording the weather conditions, just keying weather for about 3 traits, warm, cold, raining, not raining, that kind of thing. And then the market size, which is the total number of vendors at that market, and then the number of vendors that were in direct competition selling primarily the same products. So if I didn't already mention it, we did this research in 2018 with 8 farms that are diversified produce growers selling at a number of farmers markets around the Ithaca area. And I think I do that, and I'll introduce that in another slide as well. This is what Square looks like on an iPad, for example. The reason it has that name is there's all those little squares represent the products, and when you want to cash out a customer, you just touch those squares and it adds them to the basket. The way that it works, I kind of just described. You pre-program it with the name and the price of your items. Back when we did this research in 2018, you had to sell everything by the each, because Square didn't really have the variable price input, but now they've added that, and it works really, really well. So now you can sell items by the each, such as by the pint or the bunch, or you can sell it by the pound and weigh it out. To ring up a customer, you touch those squares and it does the math for you. There's no fee. You would never pay a fee on cash transactions. So like with our vegetable farmers, because customers are mostly making smaller size purchases, they mostly are paying with cash. So you're getting this data collection benefit without having to pay anything. The only fee that you would pay with Square is when you run a credit card, and then you pay the 2.9% credit card processing fee. So it's really not an expensive tool. When I was recruiting farms back in 2018, I know a lot of the farmers here in the Ithaca area, so I went to those that I'm closest with and asked them to participate. And a lot of them were worried about how much time it was going to take to hold their phone or tablet and ring up their customer order. So they didn't want to inconvenience their customers, and they didn't want to spend too much time at the market. So that's where I had to do some convincing, I would say, to recruit farms. And just want to let you know that really it's worth it to the farm to get data and make decisions based on data. So it's worth investing in your farm's viability and asking your customers to wait a few seconds while you ring them out. I'd also say that customers are used to being cashed out. Even other vendors at the farmers market, like those that are selling prepared foods, have probably been using Square for longer than some of the produce growers. Customers are used to lines, are used to cash registers. I would say also, make it clear that that's what you're doing, so they don't think you're picking up your phone to like text your friend in the middle of a transaction, but maybe have your tablet on a pedestal or something so they can tell what's going on and why you're doing that. And the other thing about having a line at the market, if this causes you, at least initially, to slow down a little bit, lines aren't bad at farmers markets. If you objectively saw two vegetable growers side by side at the same farmers market, and one had a line of 5 people and one had nobody standing in front of it all, you'd start to make conclusions. What does everybody know about that vendor? How come they're not in line over there? So I don't think lines are necessarily always a bad thing. So using the data and working with these farms in 2018, what we observed were customer transaction total, so transaction size, what time purchases were made. Again, this is all the data that was provided and that we collected, how customers were paying, the number of items they bought, what the weather conditions were, how many crops or items they had available that day, and how many vendors were at the market. There's an old saying among ag economists that you can't improve what you don't measure. It's kind of like that no farms, no food bumper sticker. I just tried to make it positive, like the yes farms, yes food sticker, and say you can improve what you do measure. So when you're running your farm, it can be easy to get trapped in the day-to-day, but think about the metrics that you want to identify, the measurements that you need to take, and then you begin your journey of incrementally improving the performance of whatever you're measuring. So what we were going to measure with that data was customer counts, both per hour and per market, the customer transaction size, both in terms of dollars and in number of items that they were buying, the farm's average daily gross sales, the average value of items that they were selling, and then looking at individual items and seeing how much they sold of those items. So I'll break all of that down. To give you a quick overarching summary from the project, we had 8 farms participate in 2018. They were doing 16 market days per week. And what that means is some of the farms were using the same farmers markets. So I had, maybe 3 or 4 farms at one market that were all participating in the project. So I count each farm at a market as a market day, and that's how I got 16 market days per week. So then during the course of that season, we really only recorded data from about June till late September. We had 205 market days that we captured data on. Out of those days, there were nearly 20,000 unique customer transactions. We didn't track the customer or any detail about the customer. So if a customer came and bought something from a farm at a market and then wandered around and came back and bought another item from them, that counts as 2 transactions because we're not tracking the customers. That total sales for all those transactions was about $128,000, and the farms collectively sold over 38,000 items. And if you use those numbers, you can start to come up with some very simple averages to look at the overall performance from that season at those markets. 98 customers per market on average. As I mentioned earlier, the $631 per market on average, which back in 2010 had been 708. So again, that's a significant decline in sales. Average customer was spending about $6.50 and buying 2 items. I want to talk for a moment about market size. We classified each of the markets that were being used as either very large, large, or medium. And I just felt upon visiting the markets that there really were no small markets that we were seeing, with 10 or fewer vendors. So all these markets were medium to very large. And you can see the total number of vendors there, and then the number of vegetable vendors, which would be sort of direct competition for the farms that were participating. So where are the growth opportunities for individual farms at markets? Well, the average daily gross sales is really the ultimate metric that we're studying here. And average daily gross sales is made up of two metrics that we could multiply into this formula. You have the number of customers that are shopping with you and the average amount that those customers spend. So to increase the average daily gross sales, you could keep customer spending level and get more customers, right? That would result in an increase. Or you could get the same number of customers as always, but have those people spending more money. That would also increase the average. Or, ideally, we'll raise both sides of this equation, bring up the number of customers and how much they spend. So that's really where we're kind of going when we start to go down this road with this data. So what do we have to look at? We have to look at customer counts, as I mentioned, per hour and per day. We have to look at customer spending, which, as you sort of get into this data, you start to realize that it comes in many different forms. We're looking at the item value and how that can be influenced by the size of the package that you're selling. I'll get into greater detail in the coming slides about that. The number of items that customers are buying. And then finally, you could revisit your pricing and think about changing your price structure. Finally, we're going to look at the top selling items. What are consumers most interested in buying at the farmers market? So we're going to look at customer counts, top selling items, and customer spending, and a few different details about it. So starting off with customer counts, looking at the customers per hour, out of all of these markets that we observed, the average number of customers per market was 98 customers. These markets ranged in time length from 3 to 6 hours, 6 hours being the longer markets. And you can see sort of a sense of the range of the number of customers per hour among the different farms, and then the average out of the 16 different market days each week. So we're looking at basically 20 customers per hour most of the time. If our goal is to increase customer counts, we can just simply brainstorm about ideas to win more customers into our booth. I think that the easiest gains to increase customers are during the slowest hours, right? If you have a peak time during your market, that's probably not when you want to recruit more customers to shop with you, because you're already busy during the peak. So we're going to look at the slower times and think of ways to bring people in. After the peak, I would spruce up the stall, freshen, restock, mist your vegetables so they look fresh and bright. Think about introducing better signage. Sorry, I had to get a little drink of water. Better signage, even signage that talks about sale prices and promotions during the slow times. Making sure that the display is visible and bountiful and colorful. And then when you know that you're heading into the slow time for your market, I think to keep making eye contact and smiling and standing up in your stall, not thinking, well, it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I know it always goes dead, I'm going to sit in my lawn chair and look at my phone. I think that I would stay present at the market and try to win some people in with eye contact. Consider how you would arrange your stall to attract more customers. And again, considering offering free samples of products or sale prices during the time that it's going to be slow. The biggest thing that we observed, and maybe Becca's going to snicker a little bit, But the biggest thing that we observed was the best opportunity to increase customer counts for the day was to get to the market earlier and be really done setting up even before the market starts. And I'm thinking here mostly about the Ithaca Farmers Market, which is a weekend market. There's no explicit rule that prevents you to sell from selling before the market begins. And indeed, a lot of the local food diehards come very early in the morning. We figure they want the best choice of, to choose out of all the produce, to choose the best ones, but also to beat the traffic and the tourists that are bound to come to the market later in the day. So clearly there was an opportunity to gather more sales by getting to the market early and setting up. And I will, sort of snicker and say there were some farms that were still setting up 20 minutes, 30 minutes after official market start time. So you can't make a sale if you're bent over a crate with your back to the customer. And I watched those customers walk away. So there's a chart of sales and the number of customers in half-hour increments. So the 8.5 at the bottom there, that means 8:30 a.m. And then the 9 is 9 a.m. and so on. We took the totals from each half hour and just plotted it out to see. And this is just from one farm, one day, but this was very typical of what we saw for these markets. So there tended to be a real peak in the first hour of the market where the gross sales and the customer counts were highest. And then there was a little break that you can see around 10:30. Actually, I realize I can put this on here. There's the peak, then there's a little break, and I think that's the opportunity to restock, freshen up your produce, mist your vegetables, and get ready, because then there's another smaller peak that's coming. And once that second peak has happened, then the rest of the day, you can count on a steady decline, but maybe that's the time to roll out signage, offering special prices, or try sampling some stuff that people haven't tried that might bring them into the stall and encourage more purchases. Again, I wouldn't be doing the samples and promotions during the peak hours. So this is what we saw typically for weekend markets that started and markets that started in the morning. We see a little bit of a different kind of peak on some of the weekday markets that were in the late afternoon, like a 2 to 6 or even a 4 to 7 farmers market. They tended to have peaks around when people were getting out of work and arriving at the market. So they didn't really peak in the first hour. But for weekend markets and morning markets, this was very typical what you see here. And in fact, we observed this is from 2018, but then in 2020, this article came out in a local Ithaca publication, and it's a vendor that was saying that the majority of his sales occur before the market opens or within the first hour. And rarely anyone else buys from his booth in the subsequent time. So, this was typical, especially of the Ithaca Farmers Market. The real serious shoppers who are going to do their grocery shopping at the farmers market, they were coming very early in the morning, and then they were leaving very quickly because of the traffic and the tourists that were bound to show up. So interesting to see this come out in the paper 2 years after our project. We're going to talk for a moment about top selling items. This is what we observed in 2018. And I want to be careful and say that we don't know for certain that lettuces and tomatoes are really the top selling items. It's not safe to make that conclusion because maybe they were available during the greatest number of market days among the greatest number of vendors in our project. So it could have been that the mere presence of tomatoes and lettuces drove them to the top of the list. That said, if you had your own data, you would certainly know what your top selling items were. And if you look there between tomatoes and cherry tomatoes and then lettuce mix and head lettuces, really they seem to dominate. And then you have the rest of the crops. Questions that the top selling items bring to my mind are, would a farm do well to make sure they always grow the top selling crops, or would you be able to win more customers by having some of the less popular items that are harder to find? Like in our area, that would be okra, maybe some hot peppers. Would you win more customers because you had those things, or should your strategy be to have the most popular items? And I don't have an answer. That's a question that you could experiment with and then track your sales data for an effect. So back, we talked about customer counts and top selling items, but what I'm going to speak the most about tonight is customer spending, because that was the real goal of the project, was to look at customer transaction size and what we could learn by looking through that data and how we could improve customer transaction size or increase it. So out of all, nearly 20,000 transactions, the average customer spend was about $6.50. I think I'll say this again on a later slide, but we think that 650 is bumped up just a little bit by a few non-vegetable items like maple syrup and honey and jams and jellies, but the vast majority of these transactions were just for produce. When we look at dollars per customer transaction or transaction size, our goal would be to increase customer spending, right? Like we discussed earlier. So the ways that we could try to increase customer spending are through the number of items that our customers are buying, the size and value of our items, and then considering price changes. So I'm going to break out each one of these three. All right, so product package size. The idea is to increase the minimum that a customer could spend at your stall. So when we look at the way that we sell our products, we can package them differently to increase the amount that a customer has to spend without making it a unit price change. So the example that's easy to illustrate is garlic. Farms were selling an individual head of garlic for $1.50. And that means that there's an opportunity to come to your stall and only spend $1.50, right? Because you can choose one head of garlic. But what if you sold them in units of two? Even if you just stick 2 heads of garlic into a pint container when you're at the market, now you're asking your customer to spend $3, right? It's a 2 for 3 deal. That's how we sell garlic. Or you could put 3 heads in a container and sell it for $4.50. I mean, garlic is a great example for this because people can buy 3 heads of garlic and keep it at home. It's not a big deal. It's not that perishable. Or for kale, if you're selling your bunches with maybe 5 stems in them for $3, you could put 7 stems in the bunch, and then you could make it $4. So again, here, the idea is that you're not increasing your prices, you're increasing your package size so that you can increase your customer spend. And this is an idea that I really kind of got excited about because I think it's subtle. It's not deceptive. It's not like the Rice Krispies where they kept the box the same size, but they kept putting less in them. We're just talking about changing our package size so that people will spend more when they shop with us. And the goal here is to eliminate very low priced, low value items. Okay, now when we think about making that change, I just want to reiterate that you could make a change like that and try it out. And if you get negative feedback, you can always go back. Remember that changes are not carved in stone. This is something that you can trial and then you can always change back. Also, if you're selling your garlic in groups of 3, which I think would be a cool idea. If a customer comes along and says, I only want 1 head, of course you can accommodate your customers. So when we think about change, maybe this is a bigger theme than this project, but when you think about change, just recognize that we can change back, we can make exceptions for customers that they're asking for it, but in general, we're trying to push the trend towards higher value items. And in fact, I showed you this chart a minute ago, the frequency of an item being sold and the total gross sales that it represented. And we could use that to create an average price per unit. So different farms sold, let's pick on tomatoes there. They sold tomatoes in many different ways, by the pound and in quart containers and by the each and so on. We don't know the unit sizes when we have this data. What we do know is that 2,161 times consumers purchased tomatoes, an item called tomato, from farms, and that the total value of those purchases was $11,914. Therefore, the average spend to get tomatoes was $5.51. Drop down to garlic, which I have highlighted. Garlic sold 923 times for a total of almost $3,000. So the average of when customers were purchasing garlic at these markets, they were spending $3.20. We could use this as a crude gauge for customer willingness to pay. Now, this is a data set that comes from 8 farms over several months. And if you're doing your own data collection, you'll only have your own for reference. But from our project, what I'd say is customers are willing to spend $3 when they buy garlic because de facto they already did. We have the data showing that they did. So putting 2 heads together and making it $3 seems like a really good fit based on what we could see in this data. All right, now, very relatedly, we're going to talk about item value. Before I was talking about package size, the average value of items, of all the items that we sold, was $3.38. This did include some potted plants, some flowers, honey, syrup, jams, and jellies. So I think if it was strictly vegetables, that item value would be just slightly lower than the $3.38. As farms, our goal is to increase the average item value that we sell. And so we can look at some of the things that we just discussed, changing the size of the package. I'm about to talk about price changes, but also the idea of bundling items and ultimately just eliminating low value items. I just like to say, eliminate the opportunity to spend, let's say $3 or less. De facto, that should increase your item value. Okay, so the number of items per customer, when we look at customer spending, the average in the whole project was about 2 items per customer. And one thing I think that's going on here, and I certainly shop at the farmers market this way, especially because I know so many of the farmers, is I call it the spread the wealth concept. So people aren't going to go to one stall and buy all their vegetables. They're going to go and buy 2 vegetables here and 2 there and 2 there and 2 there because they like all the farms at the farmers market. So that may have been happening here when we see this, this 2 items per purchase as the average. But you can see the average and the range here. When we think about items per customer and we get it from our data, our goal, what do we want to do? For the greatest impact, we can just focus on the customers that are buying 1 item and try to get them to buy a second item. Some of the ways that we might be able to do that is to make sure that we have a crop mix that includes all the top selling items. So if they're shopping with us, they might see something else they want to get. Maybe arranging the stand so that items that are frequently purchased together, you could get that from your data, are placed next to each other. Running specials. When I met with the farms from the project to review this data, they came up with ideas like, any 2 items from this table for $7. You see this kind of a game in grocery stores, or they even talked about kind of making a bundle and saying you get all of this for 20. Those are some of their ideas to increase the number of items per customer. The best idea they seem to have, and they had experience with it, was suggesting pairings. So if they did have a customer who was just going to buy garlic, they might say, what goes great with garlic is onions. And just that suggestion coming from them, they report, anecdotally, that they often had success with that. The customer would buy that second item. Okay, now I'm going to talk about pricing, because we've managed so far to mostly avoid the idea of price changes or price increases. But ultimately, if we want to increase customer spending, we can consider raising our prices, especially on fast moving and popular items. And there was a lot of worry about changing prices in our discussion with the participants. But I just wanted to point out that raising prices, I guess everybody's fear is that they'll lose some customers or sell fewer units after a price increase. And that may be true. And that's something that's called price elasticity. The idea that with each incremental price increase, we will lose a few customers. I just wanted to point out that it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to make less money in a day at the market, even if you sell fewer units when you raise your prices. So in this example, if we had our lettuce heads priced at $2.75 per head, and we were typically selling 200 heads of lettuce per market, then we would be grossing $550 out of that. If we increased our lettuce price all the way up to $3.50 and we lost, about 40 customers, we would still actually be grossing the $550 even by selling fewer heads. So when we think about price increases and fears over maybe losing a few customers, or really just losing the sales of a few items, it doesn't necessarily mean that the farm is going to make less money. And in fact, from that graph I was showing you earlier, on average, when people purchased head lettuce in our study in 2018, they were spending $3.72. So you could feel pretty confident about a $3.50 price based on that data. I hope that all made sense about price increases and the gross that you make, even if you sell fewer units. Okay, I was excited to do this project, and I knew there'd be something that the data would sort of, or the project would reveal that we didn't think of in advance. So I call that the unexpected find. And for me, what that was the sheer percent or number of customers that were spending very little with the farms that they were purchasing from. So the number of customers that were spending $3 or less on average was 28%, or let's just say it's nearly a third of customers. And you can see I shared the range here because for some of our participating farms, that percent was very high, the 45%. So nearly half of their customers were spending $3 or less. And this, for me, this was a bit shocking. So here's data from real numbers from one farm on one random day where their total gross sales was $1,226. They had 210 customers. 2 of those customers spent over $20, and 120 spent, in this case, I'm saying $5 or less, but 120 customers. So over half of their customers were spending $5 or less. And I'm just going to break that out in a chart for you here. This is the breakout on customer spending. What I noticed is that this farm in particular that provided this day of data, they were very, very busy. 2 people working really fast with all of these customers, 210 customers. But the contribution of those customers to the farm, in my opinion, it doesn't really work out. The customers that are spending $5 or less, taking a lot of time and keeping us busy, but their total contribution as a group of 120 customers was only $347. So that was really the unexpected find for me, was to look at that. And then again, to think about how do we increase customer spending, eliminate really low value items so that, they just can't take the time to only spend $1 or $1.50 with the farm. The recommendation here for this farm would be to figure out how to get more out of the 120 people through price increases, through package size, through increasing their item count from 1 to 2, and so on. This the same concepts that we just introduced. Really interesting for me to see how this customer spending was spread out. Trying to move towards a conclusion here. It's simple math. Higher prices increase customer spending. It doesn't actually mean that you'll have a better day, right? You might get very few customers when you increase your prices, but it will increase customer spending when people do spend with you. So that's simple math. However, I'll say this: the farm out of the 8 the farm that had the highest prices also had the top customer spending, meaning their customers spent more per transaction with them than the other farms. That kind of makes sense. They had the highest value per item. Again, that makes sense. But they were also the top grossing farm. And none of this hurt the number of items that their customers were buying. In other words, their customers were still buying the average of 2 items per customer. So I guess what I'm trying to talk about here is if you're nervous about price increases, just know that this high-priced farm really performed very well comparatively to farms with lower prices. Didn't hurt the number of items that their customers bought. They did have fewer customers, but they were the top grossing farm in the project. So when you start to think about these different factors of customer counts and customer spending and average daily gross sales, to me, it becomes like this soundboard where if you're sliding, if you slide one part of the soundboard up, you usually have to bring something else down a little bit. And that's kind of how these different factors interact. So you're going to want to, for your own farm, identify what you want to work on, make changes, study for progress on those changes, and then keep an eye on the other factors. So large customer transactions do not necessarily mean large daily sales. And I hadn't mentioned up to this point, but I did basic Microsoft Excel work with all this data, but then my partner um, put it all into statistical software and did real statistical analysis of all the transactions. And what he found was that cold weather customers, people who shopped during cold weather farmers markets, spent more. Their customer transaction size was higher. So that sounds good, right? That's the slider going up. But there were fewer customers on cold weather days. So that's the customer count slider now coming down. And therefore, the farms experienced lower gross sales on cold weather days. So that's the average daily gross sales that comes down during cold weather. So you see customers that are spending more. However, there's few customers. So you have a lower gross sales in that example. So it is tricky to keep track of all of these things, all these moving parts, if you will. A few other notes that we learned from the project. In terms of the farmers market size, it's true that the greater the number of vendors at the market, it had a negative effect on daily sales for any individual farm, and also a negative effect on customer count. However, like cold weather, it had a positive effect on transaction size. So our rationale is that people who come to large farmers markets come prepared to spend. So they have bigger transactions, but because it's a large market with lots of vendors, there's so much competition out there that any individual vendor will see fewer customers, to the point at which they actually has a negative effect on daily sales. Also wanted to mention that when we did this project, we wondered about missed transactions that weren't recorded in Square. Either the farm was just setting up or they were too busy during a peak. So we compared the sales total from the Square data with their cash drawer at the end of the day, and concluded that we had recorded 90% of all their transactions based on the difference between the cash drawer and the reported sales in the data. In 2020, prior to COVID erupting, so in January of 2020, I asked the 8 farms would they plan on using point of sale software in the 2020 season, and 6 out of the 8 reported that they would. And I have to say, of the 8, only 1 was using Square at the beginning of the project. In other words, I had to convince 7 to participate. Cashed in all my goodwill on those folks and asked them to participate in my project. But the good news is that one of the farms that was most difficult to convince, just 2 weeks into the project of recording data, she said, "How were we ever not doing this?" And that, to me, that's a great success, when she saw the value of capturing her data and reviewing it later on, and thought, well, how did we ever not do this? And another one of the farms reported that they no longer needed to bring a notebook to market to write down things like how many units they brought to the market, how many they were packing up to go home. They were getting all of that out of their Square data. In summary, choose a metric to focus on, introduce changes at the market, and monitor for results. And you can use your data, just doing some basic number crunching to see how it's going, introduce a change, and then see what the impact is. Consider raising item values. Consider your crop selection and how you display it. Engage customers during slow times. Get to market on time, be all done setting up and ready to sell. Some markets do have rules that you can't sell before the official start time. At least then you can be set up. Some markets don't have those rules. And, I would be ready to sell early before the market starts. And, it may be time to raise prices. So give that consideration. I do want to mention that we are recruiting farms. I'm really supposed to be recruiting New York State farms. That said, I think we could squeak across the border into New York if I had farms that into Massachusetts that were interested in participating. So I'm recruiting farms for very similar research in the coming 2022 market season that are selling either produce or meat by the cut at farm stores and farmers markets. So if you're interested in participating, you would be submitting your Square data to us, and in turn, we would give you summary reports and make recommendations and offer one-on-one technical assistance. last thing, I have a short, 2-page publication that came out in the Cornell Smart Marketing series about the 2018 project. If you care to read it, you can just search online for Cornell Smart Marketing and look at the January 2020 publication. And I'll just finally offer my email. If you want to email me, you think of a question later on, or you're interested in participating in the research, you can do that there. So with that, I will stop and maybe turn it over to Becca.
Sounds good. Let me try to share my screen. I think this is the second or third time I've heard Matt share that presentation, and each time it gets my brain going, trying to think of ways that I can apply some of that information with the data that I've collected. Okay, so Matt asked me to talk a little bit about using Square as a decision-making tool at our own farm. And as he mentioned, we run a small diversified farm in Berkshire, New York. We grow pasture-raised meats. We also have started to produce a lot of vegetables over the last couple of years. So it's changed a little bit about how we display our market stand, as well as how we're collecting data and what we're kind of figuring out from that data. So that's kind of added a different element to it. Previously to farming, I managed different farmers markets across the Northeast for about 10 years. I was at Ithaca Market for about 5 years until 2020. So I had a chance to work with Matt on some of these projects and talk to some of the farmers that were involved. And one of the challenges that I found when managing markets is how do we define when a market is successful? And so often that relates to how vendors are capturing information about their sales and their experiences at market. And what I found is that farmers had a variety of ways to capture that information, and a lot of it was qualitative, not necessarily quantitative, based on data. And when Square came out, this was something that made it loads easier to really capture that data. So when we began our farm in 2016, I knew from the very beginning that I wanted to use a point of sale system to capture our data so that we can compare it from year to year, from month to month, and really understand what was going on. We chose Square because it was easy, it was accessible. We wanted to accept credit cards. It coalesces the data for us, and I'll talk a little bit more about that and how you can access that and what we use that for. And it can also track individual customer purchases. So the ease of use for Square and the accessibility has been really one of the main reasons why we started utilizing it in 2016. So we use 3 different apps right on my smartphone. Most of the time I access anything related to Square, it's right on my iPhone. So we use the Square point of sales app. We use the dashboard app, which is where I access all of the data. And then when we started doing farm to door delivery service, when COVID hit, we started using invoices more for deliveries, but also for market pre-orders, where we could pack the order at home, send our customers an invoice, and they could pay via email. And so that's been a really useful app with the ability to integrate with all of our Square information. So at the most basic level, we use the dashboard app to look at daily sales snapshots. So this is something that I tend to look at after each market day, just to kind of get an idea of where we're at. I might look at it during market day if it's slower. It gives you an idea of what your total gross sales are, what your average sale is, the number of customers that you've had. And then you can also take a look at your sales comparison versus previous Saturdays or the following year, or previous year. And you can also break down whether your sales were mostly cash, mostly credit, EBT, Venmo. There's so many different ways to pay that this also helps you track that. And as Matt said earlier, you don't have to take credit cards to utilize this app. Our products tend to be a little bit of a higher price point. So we see about half of our gross sales in credit card sales is what we found this past year. So one of the things I love about Square is that you can really pull comparison information pretty quickly. So this is a comparison from September 4th of this past year to the week before in the first shot, and then also the year before, the same Saturday the year before. So I can see how things are shaping up, if we're kind of hitting our goals, if sales are lower, if sales are quite a bit higher, if it's because our average sale is less, or if it's because the number of sales are more, or whatever. The data is right there. It's really easily accessible with a push of a couple buttons. And it's something that we look at on a frequent basis just to kind of gauge where we're at so that we can readjust if we need to. We set everything up based on categories and items. So our categories are our enterprises, and the items are the things that fall within those enterprises. So I'll explain a little bit more about that in the next slide. This helps us figure out the total amount of sales based on a category and the total quantity now based on pounds of pork chops sold or number of pints of cherry tomatoes we've sold, so that we can really keep track of the quantity. So as you can see here as an example, this was, again, that September 4th. We had our pigs as our general enterprise category. So we sold $420 in pork. We sold 13.7 pounds of pork chops, 11 pounds of butt roast, and so on and so forth. So we can kind of take a look at this on a daily basis, or if we wanted to, we could pull it out in a spreadsheet and really have a better understanding of the seasonality of those products, especially with products like meat that might store longer. And at the end of the year too, you can pull it up as a yearly report and understand the total number of units you've produced for the year, which I think is motivating, but it's also a really good way to decide your crop planning for next year, is understanding this information. And then in the on-screen computer screenshot that I've pulled up here, you can also see how many of these items were sold based on the hour at market. So some of our markets tend to see higher meat sales at the beginning of market and lower meat sales at the end. Some markets are higher produce sales and lower meats or higher meat sales at the end. So it varies, and it helps us understand a little bit more about customer need, staffing, if we need to bring extra staff just for the first few hours, or if we need to set up our display a little bit differently or change it throughout the market day. We've also loaded in locations, which is it's not a newer feature, but it's something that I've started to explore more over the past year. We've added individual markets as different locations. So each time somebody logs in, they can choose a location, and it will actually allow you to filter out when you pull the reporting based on those locations. So it's really handy when you're at, say, 2 markets on a Saturday. My partner does one, I do another. So I'm able to filter out my sales and understand where my sales are at and if we're meeting our goals. And I can in real time look to see how his sales are doing. So if, for instance, I see that he's not selling as many tomatoes as as we had hoped, I could do a social media post in the moment on tomatoes and try to draw some customers down to market with that. So we can kind of make some real-time decisions based on this information that we can pull up pretty quickly. And at the end of the year, we can go back and look at this data and look at the individual locations in the individual markets and decide if it's really worth attending that market. So this is a big piece of how we determine which markets to attend or continue attending, and how long we continue to attend them throughout the season. An additional piece of information, which I have just started to explore, is the customer aspect of Square. This has been especially helpful for our delivery and invoicing. It's helped us understand the frequency of purchases and what exactly individual customers have purchased. And it's also provided a platform for customer feedback. And this is something that customers are so used to doing now, is clicking a smiley face or providing feedback in electronic form, so that folks know, and other customers can see this feedback as well. So it's a nice motivating factor, but it's also a good way to understand where you can improve. These are some examples of some customer information I've pulled from our Square information. Justin is a customer that is regular at market. Square will record regular customer purchases when a credit card is involved, or if you set up a customer in the Square app. So we have several customers who only purchase with credit cards. So Justin, for instance, comes to every market, buys from us every market. He purchases with a credit card about a quarter of the time. His wife purchases with her credit card the other quarter of a time, but we can see which items he frequently buys. And this can help us tailor his customer experience at market. We also know, just from interacting with him, that he comes at the end of market. So if we look at his frequent items, we might decide that we want to set aside and make sure there are some chicken wings for him, so that he's happy when he gets there. And we can kind of make some decisions based on some of this information that we have here. Karen, on the other hand, was a frequent delivery customer. And so you can see that she spent on average about $125 with us each delivery. We can take a look at her top choices. She mainly bought pork from us. If we wanted to try to increase her daily spend, we might try including a sample pack of our chicken breast, or we might try including some vegetables, and try to kind of get her to explore some of our different items that way. And that, again, helps us tailor the customer experience and helps us make sure that we're serving our customers to the best of our ability. There are ways that you can set up rewards programs for customers. Even if they don't use a credit card, you can program in the customer, and it might be worth exploring that a little bit more if you have time, to really, again, better understand what your customers are purchasing each time, and how you can tailor to that individual. Another thing that we often look at are the transactions. So Matt had spoken about finding ways to increase the average sale. So if we go through and we look at our transactions and we notice that people are spending $4, is there a way we can get them to spend that extra dollar and increase it to $5? We tried that this summer. We had a lot of products that were $4. We put some products that were $1 right next to the register. And instead of asking for change, people would often grab that extra cucumber or whatever it was to round out that $5 purchase. So we were able to use some of those last minute purchases based on some of the information we have here. And you can see what people are buying together. So beets, fingerling, potatoes. We have a lot of folks that'll buy beans and whatever else we sell. So what are they pairing together, and how can you utilize that information to kind of increase the average sale? So that was just a really quick overview of how we utilize Square at, stop sharing. How we utilize Square at our farm. There are a lot of different ways that you can utilize Square to make decisions based on the data that you collect. At this point, it's super easy. It's second nature for us to just use Square at market. Folks, as Matt said, are fine waiting for a few seconds while we plug in that information. And really, if there's a line, it's not an issue with a lot of our customers. So the challenges of using Square at market are minimal compared to the information and the ease of information gathering and kind of data filtering that you get from a program like that. So, and I'm happy to answer any questions if folks have them at any point.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Becca. I know Sarah had a question. It might be interesting to address it now as we get ready to transition to Pete, who's going to talk about something other than Square and maybe how he made his decision. But I don't know if either of you or Matt want to answer her question. Just, if anyone else has experience or functionality or ease of reporting with other features using one POS system versus another. And so I think folks on this webinar are probably interested in well, why choose one POS system over another, or folks have thoughts about that that we want to address at this point before we transition into Toast, which is a different one.
That's a great question, because I became self-conscious of how often I was promoting Square, and I was writing a note to myself, I'm not a spokesman, right? So I guess I'd say as a researcher, I found that Square was easy and intuitive for me to use in the 2018 season when I was using it with farms. But also, so far, when I've been recruiting farms, I just did Square research for the point of sale research for the past year, recruited farms from all over New York State, and they came to me with data from several different point of sale systems, but unfortunately, none of them that I've seen so far had adequate export function. So with detail, so with Square, what I'm having farms do is send me two different Excel reports. One is at a customer transaction level, so it has, in one row in Excel, it has all the date stamp, the time stamp, all the items the person bought, the total, how they paid, all those details, and a unique transaction ID and a unique payment ID. And then the second report is an items detail report, where each row in Excel is for each individual item, but it cross-references with the same transaction ID and all the same kind of data. So we've tried to work with PayPal and QuickBooks and something called Spot On, and we couldn't get that level out of those platforms. I feel like there was one other one. So suffice to say, there could be other really good options out there, and I haven't explored all of them. I know that Grow NYC did explore various point of sale options, and I think they put out a publication sort of summarizing the different options. But that's been my take on Square, is I can get what I want into Excel.
Yeah, and I'll just jump on and add, I was thinking the same thing, Matt. I don't want to sound like I'm a Square advertisement, because I'm not. It's just a program that we've used, and it's been really easy for us to use. And I think as most farmers find themselves in July, you're not sitting in front of a computer that often. And so you need to be able to access that information quickly. I don't necessarily want to pull my computer out after I'm out in the field all day, but I do have my phone on me. So if there's a question, or even if somebody puts in an order, I can quickly access it. So I think whatever platform you use, thinking about where you're going to use it, and whether you can use it easily with a smartphone and kind of pull that information from that platform is really important. I will say there are some things about that Square that drive me bonkers. Like, for instance, my pocket inputted a $50,000 sale that I can't delete. So that's showing up in my data from last year. So, I know it's there. It's not a huge deal, whatever, but it's something that, there are like those little quirks that make it kind of funny to work with. But overall, it's been a really, the ease of use has been really nice, especially as it comes on my phone.
Great, thank you. Well, let's transition over to Pete now to introduce a different platform as well and share his experience with that.
Unmute myself. Hello, everyone. So I'm going to share my screen. I have a little slideshow, and then what I thought I would do, which is a little bit different, is I can share my back end of Toast live and show you the data that we have from today. People can ask questions. I can go through the menu and some of the sales summary and some of the data collection that we get. But let me share my screen here. Here we go. All right, everyone can see that? Okay, so we are a little bit different than Matt and Becca in that we are not going to farmers markets, and we, Jen and I started our livestock business over 10 years ago, and we never did a lot of farmers markets, although we have used Square extensively for both farmers markets and for our what had been a long time ago a little self-serve store. So our evolution is we started over 15 years ago with, I was farming full-time. I had a large farm stand and vegetable operation, and we started on the side growing some pasture-raised livestock, and that developed into a business that became quite robust as a part-time enterprise. And we moved here to Codman Farm, which is a nonprofit community farm in Lincoln, in 2016. And so I'm gonna start there. These are the photos from this farm. It's a community farm that was started in 1973 on a historic property, and we have access to some amazing infrastructure. And that main barn you see there is where we currently house our farm store, which I'll be talking about mainly during this presentation. So when we moved here in 2015, Jen may laugh at that photo, we walked into the existing self-serve farm store, and that was the farm store, which was a meet CSA, come grab your bag and go home. And it was pretty much a disaster, as you can see, as it is. People would rip open bags. It was a self-serve, self-pay system. They did less than $25,000 a year out of a few freezers of whenever they had meat. We moved here, we had an existing little self-serve store, and this is the same space that we quickly reorganized with just, stand-up freezers and a little table you see there, completely honor system, self-serve, and people filled out envelopes and paid cash and check. When we moved here the prior year, they did, again, 25,000 in sales. Jen and I had a thriving part-time livestock business. And our first year here, we did, including all sales, some online pre-ordering, we did between $400,000 and $500,000 that first year. And a lot of that sales were via cash envelope. So people wrote down their transaction, stuffed the check or cash in the envelope, and put it in a little pay box. And the farm here was quickly overwhelmed because it was way too much cash for them to be able to handle effectively, for us to track sales, for our bookkeeper to keep up with. So we knew we had to do something different. And so the first thing we adapted to was the free Square terminal, but it wasn't really meant to be used, and it's still not meant to be used as a self-serve kiosk. So one of the things when folks become familiar with Square is that there is a way to lock down some of the features so it can be used sort of in a self-serve mode. So what we did was we attached a barcode scanner, and then you can see that little display there where we had barcodes that we made up on the computer and laminated sheets and put prices on some of our product and encourage customers to scan items out or select them from the screen. But what happened was we were using this system as we were growing as a farm. We were doing more and more money in the store, upwards of $1,000 a day. And the issue with Square is that it has since evolved, but at that time, which was 2017, 2018, is that the barcode reader is not able to read what's called variable weight barcodes. So when you put a product on a scale and it prints out a pork chop at $5 a pound times 1.5 pounds, it prints out a price of $7.50. And at the time, Square was not able to read that barcode that said $7.50. So what we had to do is we had to manually enter every weight variation we possibly could experience. So if we had pork chops that were between 5 and 10 pounds, we had to enter every weight variation as possible. And we kind of hacked into a way and did a calculation and uploaded it. And so we literally had thousands of items for like just, a few weighted items. And it was quickly overwhelming. It was too much work for the staff to keep up. And we knew that it was a problem we couldn't continue to deal with. And so we started looking around, and there were very, very few products out there that had a self-serve kiosk terminal that was not confusing to use, and that had a system that read what's called variable weight, variable priced barcodes. And so we came across Toast, which is a restaurant system, but has a mode that is called kiosk mode. And so it's meant to be used by a person to self-checkout, like a sandwich or something like that. But it had the ability to read variable price barcodes. It had integrated barcode scanner, had integrated, credit card acceptance. So we looked at every other option, and it was the best option for us at the time. The price went from $0 per month per terminal to $75 per month per terminal. So we opted for 2 terminals. One we used actively and one we had in the back to sort of program new products when they came in. So again, this was what I talked about with how to, we had to have extensive instructions as to how to use the system when we had it set up in Square. This is a similar scale we still use, which prints out the variable priced barcodes on our meat products and produce. And we have what's called PLU codes, a code that refers to a specific item with a specific weight already programmed into the scale. So this is our current farm store today, literally today. This is literally today. I took these a few hours before. So during COVID, up until COVID began, we were doing $30,000 to $60,000 a month in our store. Business had slowly grown organically as people realized that we were here. Again, this is a self-serve honor store. No one works in the store. No one checks anyone out. We do not accept any cash, except for the occasional people who still want to write checks or give us cash, and they still scribble on an envelope and write what they bought and stick it in the pay box. But as you provide the opportunity for people to self-check out, using a credit card is the easiest way. And then we also then start to capture a lot of data on their sales. So right after COVID started, the advantage of our honor system store was no touch. So people really liked the ability to not have to interact with anyone. And the other unique thing about our honor system store is that we never, ever close the store. It's open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. We have a blizzard. You can come into the store. We have a power outage. We now have, on-farm generator to keep the whole farm running during a power outage. So we are a resource now in our small town of Lincoln, where if the power goes out, we're one of the few places that remains open and viable. All our freezers are on backup power. So we're here for our community to serve them. And so that really proved our point during COVID. And so as more and more people started to find us during COVID, this picture you see here is the main barn, and we never used to have the store in the main barn. It used to be, so this is the main barn. It used to be here in our smaller 14 by 12 foot footprint insulated space that's sectioned off in the barn. So you can see here some glass freezers we had attached to a high efficiency freezer we installed our second year here. You can see the Toast terminal sitting there on the counter. You can see the cameras up above that screen. We have cameras throughout the stores operating 24/7, recording everything. You can see here this pay box. So we still take envelopes and we still accept cash, although it's less than 3% of our sales at this point. So this part of the store still operates. It has a terminal in there. You can see it right there, still with a barcode scanner, still with a chip reader that also accepts Apple Pay. And this is our main terminal where we have one receipt printer, a Toast tap, which also accepts EMV, and Apple Pay and Android and everything else. So this is a self-serve kiosk. It's exactly what it looks like when you walk up to it. It says order now because it's really geared for restaurants, and so they don't allow you to change any of that programming, and that is one of the frustrating things about it. The reason we went to Square, as I outlined before, is that it has this kiosk mode versus the confusing interface of Square. The Square is not made for self-checkout, the pricing barcode issue I talked about, and so on. And so that's a little summary. So one of the things we did during COVID is that we're able to make a splash screen. And we thought, hey, maybe people would be supportive of what we're doing here at the farm, being available 24/7 for people to buy products from us. And so we put up this is the first tab on our screen where people can quickly donate $5, $10, whatever to the farm before they begin their transaction. And much to our surprise, during the first few months of COVID, we were collecting about $1,500 a month in donations from putting up this splash screen. And it was including a donation to our local food pantry. So we were donating sometimes $1,000 a month to the local food pantry and collecting almost $1,000 a month to the nonprofit for the good work that we were doing. And this continues to this day. We don't have as much goodwill as we did back then, but we're still collecting almost $700 to $900 a month in donations. This is another tab that you can see. So in addition to being able to scan barcoded items, people can tap and add items to their cart like that. And you can associate pictures just like in Square. So what's interesting about what we do in the self-serve model is that every item is barcoded. So we pre-bag, and this is one of the labor demands that we currently are facing that we're going to be fixing with a move to a new system. But we have to pre-weigh and barcode every item in the store for simple checkout. So every item, whether it's an apple or carrots or onions or garlic, every container, every item, every piece of butternut squash has to have a barcode on it. So we have 2 scales in the back of our store, in the back of our of the barn, where we have one person working all day prepping and reloading the store so customers can self-check out. We have a new printer here, which will allow us to, since we don't have a staff in the store all the time, and we only buy local, we only buy from regional growers and local vendors. We don't source from big distributors. We started improving our scale printout so people could have more transparency, understanding where we're sourcing product from, whether it's local, organic, certified organic, the vendor itself, where they're located, and the price. So while Toast has been a really great thing for us as we've expanded and grown, so pre-COVID, we were doing $30,000 to $60,000 a month. And then as due to COVID, we had this huge demand. So we started buying in more local produce, sourcing product if we started running low on ourselves. On our own, if our own meats or eggs were running low, we were sourcing from other local vendors and farms that we knew. Sales really skyrocketed. And so for us, COVID was, an opportunity that we took advantage of. And, as you saw, we expanded into the barn. And so our sales went from, growing organically from 2016 to 2020. We grew from, 400,000 to 750,000. And last year, this year, we'll probably do 2 million in sales. And so this is all sold directly in our farm store through self-checkout. This is, again, no one checking anyone out. This is all sales by customers checking themselves out in the store. But what we're finding now, as our customer counts have increased from 100 to 300 people a day, our average sale at $35 a day, we're collecting a lot of data, but we're also realizing that we're missing out on some income, and we're having some operational issues. One of the issues is the system is not as intuitive as it could be. And so when you have that kind of customer count, we're finding that customers are not completing their sales properly. last year, we had about $15,000 in voided transactions where customers took product home and didn't really realize that they didn't finish their transactions properly. And so that was lost opportunity, lost revenue for us. The system does not accept SNAP or EBT because it's meant for restaurants. We have these voids due to people not accurately completing their transaction and completing their signature. The system as it stands now, there can be add-ons, but we don't have the ability to track vendors, and we're not tracking perpetual inventory. We have over 1,500 items now we're selling in the store, including all of our variable meat products, and there's no scale integration directly with Toast. So if we change a product weight in Toast, in our scale, we need to then hand enter the change into Toast, and it's a two-step process, which is prone to mistakes. We want to be able to better engage our customers, and the loyalty product that comes with Toast is quite limited. And there's what's called a 30-second timeout. So if a customer is grabbing an extra item they forgot and they've started checking out themselves, after 30 seconds, their whole cart will empty in front of them, and they're left quite disturbed that they spent all that time checking themselves out, and then they have to start all over again. So we've been fortunate that we've had a local foundation who is supportive of what we're doing, and we have found a new system called ECRS. And this is, Toast and ECRS, they're not meant for farmers markets. These are not mobile systems. These are hardwired PCI compliant systems where you have a server on hand, and it's much more complex. It's not like a supermarket system per se, but it's the step towards that. And so ECRS is a company based in North Carolina, and they focus on co-ops and small specialty retailers. And so they have one of the only small tabletop systems available that also operate in self-checkout mode. And so we have found that system, and we're going to be moving towards that. It's not inexpensive. 3 terminals will cost $60,000 with all the associated hardware. And it's a huge investment in resources and time to learn about the system, but it's our next evolution. One of the things, just really quickly, and then I'll show you the Toast back end and people can ask questions, is that it's much more simple. It prompts you through. It accepts SNAP EBT. It will accept cash through a bill acceptor. It integrates all the scales as we need to, so programming is done from one central location. It'll be more intuitive, so we'll avoid this loss of revenue from voids. It has an integrated fingerprint scanner, so you don't even need a credit card. Once you sync all your data into the system, you use your fingerprint, and you don't need to you don't need to have a phone or anything. It'll track your whole account, and it has much more robust loyalty systems, the inventory control. So our monthly costs will go up from about $300 a month now to about $650 a month with ECRS, but the system and our current scale of sales makes it a worthwhile decision for us to move on from. So I can switch to, let's see, I gotta find that other tab here. So this is our screen here for the Toast back end. It is somewhat similar to Square. It has, graphs of your daily sales. This was our sales in the store today. We did $39.74. We were down 12.77 from last year, same day last week, similar to as Becca talked about in Square. And then we have a whole other list of menus and ways to drill down. And one of the things that I like to do really quickly first when I'm looking at a day's sales is to look at, so here's our gross sales. And down here, we have our total customer count, and down here, we have our average order of $35. And so the next thing I normally look at when I'm tracking our daily sales is looking at, Becca used a term for her menu groups, which is similar to what we're doing. And this is the categories of items that we're selling. We're tracking like our egg sales, 59 dozen sold today. We sold 267 units of vegetables today, 105 units of pantry items, and so on. And so we then can look at individual items by day. This is just an alphabetical order, average price, how many units we sold. And I can look at what are our top selling items. So we sold, 35 pounds of Free Ranger chickens today, and then the breakdown is from there. And so it's just a really great tool that we use to base my orders from, base our production off of, and then we can aggregate, by day, by month. I can, sort by week, any iteration that I want. And so it's been a really great tool. Once you're able to start collecting data, like Matt and Becca said, it's like a whole different ball game. You really are able to understand your business so much better. And a lot of the things that Matt talked about with, understanding your customers' purchase patterns and understanding, how to upsell and how to put items closer to a register for them to self-check out, like Becca talked about. These are all, little tricks that you learn to, boost sales, to make your customers happier. And for us, having this data has been, an evolving game changer for us. And it takes time to understand and to look at it, to use it, but it really, improves how you're running your business so much. So with that, Jen, I don't know what else you want to open the group up to, but I'll stop there.
Great, thank you so much for that. I know we're running out of time, and there's so much more we could dive into here and like geek out on all the numbers and the data and how everybody uses their information to make decisions. But that's the point, as Matt said, I think what is it? You can't measure, or you can measure what you do track, or you can
improve what you do measure.
You can improve what you do measure. I love that. Right. So yeah, I think that's the message we hope to leave you with for sure this evening. So I'm gonna, I hope folks don't mind, we are certainly open to questions. There was a question here by Pam, does Square now work with the self-serve sales? And while we're asking questions, I'm gonna launch the final poll. I would love for people to respond to that while we close out with final questions that folks have. So please feel free to either unmute yourself and ask, or put some questions in the chat.
And I'm not aware of a self-serve function on Square. The truth is, I don't really use Square. I only use its export in Excel. So Becca knows way more about today's version of Square than anybody I know, actually.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Square has a self-serve feature at this point. I think that it's important to keep track of Square and all of these programs, because the technology is changing so drastically that it could be different next week. So I think keeping an eye out on them and kind of tapping into some of the farmer groups on Facebook and around the country to understand how other folks are using it and how it can be used is really important.
So at this time, no, the answer is no. I've met with some reps from Square very recently. There are some third-party companies that can program it for you. They usually take a percentage of sales, or including the build out. But Square itself does not have a product. You can use it as we did, and you can lock out features, but it's not an intuitive system, but it can be used. We did use it for a long time like that, but there's not a clean system that Square themselves have come up with at this point.
Great. Are there other folks or questions that folks have, or is anyone on the screen here? Are you using a different point of sale tool that you'd like to share or tell us about as well? Or anything that we didn't cover in this session that you would have liked to learn about? If not, you're welcome to post that in the evaluation that I will send to you as a follow-up. So I would love to thank the speakers. Oops, sorry, Julia had a question here. She'd be curious to see the business case Matt, I guess maybe that's something that's in your report, or like, how did any of the farmers follow up with what, after you made some recommendations?
I would love to see that too. So, you know,
That's
what
another
we had,
grant.
what we had funding, yeah, we're doing it now, to tell you the truth. So we're doing it now, but in 2018, we had the funding to get all that data from that season and look at it, but we never recommended any changes to measure their impacts. And then in 2019, we didn't do any research at all with that, or in 2020. And then we just recorded this past season, 2021, we're still working with, but coming soon, we'll be making recommendations and seeing if we can have a positive impact on customer transaction size or customer counts.
Great. And Alex is sharing that she used Local Line last year, which does POS, but also pick lists and online orders. So that's great. I will add that to the resource list for folks to look into. And Matt, do you have a link for the Grow NYC study? Do you want to send me that email?
I can try to find that, yeah.
Or if you want to put that in the chat, that would be great too.
I don't think I can find it that fast.
Oh, okay. All right, you can send it to me. Great. Are there any other questions that folks have? Great. Well, thank you so much. In the emails that I sent to folks with the link to this meeting, I did include in the CC line Matt, Rebecca, and Pete's emails. So hopefully they don't mind if folks have questions. You're welcome to reach out to them. As I mentioned, we will be posting all the materials from the recording from this session, and any materials will turn into a fact sheet will be on the resource website on our webpage, which I will send out as well with that email as a follow-up, and this recording will be posted to our YouTube channel. So thank you all so much. Thanks, Matt, Becca, and Pete for presenting and sharing your expertise with us. We really appreciate it, and hopefully we'll see the rest of everybody else on the next session. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you. And thanks, Pete. That was really, really cool to see. Thanks.
Thanks.